Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into the video. We're going to be discussing GPU news. There's been quite a bit that's popped up over the last few days, and we're going to be discussing pricing cuts from AMD yet again, and also shipment information. No, don't check Amazon quite yet. Instead, these are engineering samples. We're going to start out with Nvidia's, and then we're going to move on, of course, to AMD's. So this comes to us from 3D Center, so props to the friend of mine who sent me the link for this. They're not actually a viewer, they're actually a real-time friend. So let's start out with the GP104. So it is, of course, and I don't think I need to tell you this, it's a successor to the GM204, which of course was not the ultra-high card, not the bleeding edge card, but the, well, it's found in the GTX 970 kind of end card from Maxwell. So moving on, what we suspect this card is probably going to be able to achieve is probably around the same speed, maybe slightly faster than the GTX 980 Ti and the Titan X. We're basing this, yes, off of some speculation, but it's just kind of how Nvidia and AMD have worked in the past in terms of if you've got a new architecture. Typically, for the sake of argument, if you buy a card, the 670 was considerably faster than, like, let's say the 670 was faster than, let's say, the 580, and it's just kind of how it usually works in the GPU industry. So it would make some sense here. Now, the real oddity is the size of the package. Misses. Now, as many of you are aware, the high-end card, the bleeding edge card, the equivalent of the Titan X for the GP100 and for the GP100 series. I don't know what the hell we're going to call this one yet. I'm loath to call it GeForce 1000 because I just don't really feel it rolls off the tongue. Not that I think the GeForce 980 Ti or, you know, any of the other real names that pop up. I mean, let's face it, does Radeon 7970 Gigahertz Edition really sound like a smooth and subtle naming convention? Probably not. Anyway, I digress. So, according from what we're hearing here, and from Zauba, which is Z-A-U-B-A, which has many shipping manifestos, the GP104 is in a package size of 37.5 by 37.5 mm, obviously, which is considerably smaller than the GM204's 40 by 40, which isn't really surprising given the smaller engineering sizes. However, what's rather interesting is the number of pins. So we're looking at 2152 versus 1745, which could be more to do with the architecture itself rather than anything else. It probably doesn't really mean much in and of itself. But, as you know, the high-end cards are featuring high bandwidth memory. Well, specifically high bandwidth memory too, right? But some are speculating that the GM204 will not be using HBM2 and it instead will be using GDDR5X. Now, that's kind of a weird thing to say, but remember that we as, I guess you could say, tech enthusiasts have always speculated that there'll be a cutoff, well there is a cutoff, between the HBM memory and GDDR5X, or GDDR5, or GDDR6, or whatever the hell it ends up being called. And essentially speaking, where that cutoff is unknown. Now, do remember these are not shipped to the customers, so once again they could be engineering samples and things could change, but it's very unlikely at this stage. So it's possible that with the GP104, this is where the cutoff is, or maybe there'll be a couple of different models or what have you, we just don't know. What's really interesting, well, there's a lot of really interesting things, aren't there? But the other thing that's interesting is that the GP104 potentially has water cooling. Now, I'm not against that. It depends, I guess, on the pricing, because it lists it right there. The shipping, by the way, the date is listed at the 29th of December 2015. These guys do not rest. There is GPU all the time. Now, I did also promise you some AMD stuff. Polaris. Now, Team Red, of course, have been working on the Polaris architecture for some time, and we know some stuff about it. What's really interesting is there are multiple model numbers. Of course, for the shipping manifesto reasons, they don't call them, let's say for the sake of argument, GTX, or sorry, not GTX, R9 390 or R9 490X or something like that. Instead, they go by code names to make it a bit more tricky for us and Nvidia and anyone else to spy on them and know what the hell's going on. So, for the sake of argument, it looks like the cards that we're seeing, which are C9113 and C924, are potentially mid to entry-level GPUs. Now, there are other boards, which, for the sake of argument, is the C98X series of cards, which are more expensive than the current Hawaii XT-based boards. Now, what this probably means is a very similar situation to Nvidia. Once again, speculation, but it's possible that we're not seeing the bleeding edge cards, the equivalent of the Fury X's or the Fury X2s or what have you. For sake of argument, the Fury X, just for your FYI, is known as the C880, or the Nano is known as the C882 in Shipping Manifesto. So it's potentially that we're seeing a card that's the equivalent, I guess you could say, in AMD's current naming conventions of like the R9 390. Maybe the R9 390X, something like that. Now, I did also promise you some news and pricing cuts. Ready for it? Are you? Are you? Yes, of course you're ready for it. And that would be R9 Nano. Now, these suckers were a little more expensive than what many had hoped they would be, but these things are tiny, as you all know. I mean, it's about half a foot in length. It's about 6 inches. So the cards have come down, and now, according to AMD themselves, they're going to be pricing them at just $499 US. I say just, of course, in the loosest possible sense. Now, as we all know, they've got peak power consumption of 175 watts, 6-inch form factor, and it's absolutely tiny. Now, AMD, of course, do market the fact that they're about 30% higher in performance than the GTX 970 Mini ITX. So, according to AMD, and this is a quote, as of today, January 11th, this small card will give even bigger impact on gamers around the world, as the card drops from $649 to $499 US, or your regional equivalent. Actually, not a bad kind of price, to be honest. I would have loved for this card to have released at that price to begin with, to be honest. I think it would have made a massive, massive, massive impact on the market, because that price, it would have, to be honest with you, it probably would have stomped the GTX 970 in terms of pricing, price performance. As it turns out, of course, HBM1 was not cheap to produce, so I'm not criticising AMD or anyone else actually for the pricing of their cards, because let's face it, it's not like it was cheap to engineer. We all know that, I guess you could say that Nano was almost a proof of concept. It wasn't just like, oh, we're producing this card as like a one-off. It was kind of a preview of what's to come. So, for the sake of argument, it's a preview of what's going to happen with Pascal and all the other GPUs that we've discussed at length, rather. But yeah, so hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'm kind of busy at the moment doing hardware reviews in the background. Still reviewing FreeSync and some other bits and pieces. We've got the graphics card review done, which is good. FreeSync we're doing now, we've had to test it over a couple of different graphics cards, not because we've had problems with it, just because if I'm going to recommend something that's not, how can I put it, that's not absolute in performance. So for the sake of argument, if I'm reviewing a graphics card or a monitor, sorry, a graphics card or a hard disk or a I don't know, router or a CPU or memory, you can do something that's really simple. You can run, I wouldn't say simple, but you can get an absolute number. You can look at how many frames per second you've got and done. So yes, you've got stuff to worry about. You've got to worry about what benchmark settings, and you've got a lot of legwork to do, but it's not absolute. Whereas with a monitor, it's kind of like your perception. So what I'm also looking at is like what type of cards make a difference. Like, does it make a difference if you're running like an R9 390 on it, or does it work fine with a lower end card? So in that case, I've done quite a lot of testing with the 380X. Now I've switched up to the 390 series, and it's actually kind of cool. So I'm really enjoying FreeSync. So hopefully that review will be this weekend along with something else. Then we're going to be switching to some other stuff that I've been meaning to do for some time now, but I've just not really had time, so it's going to be more technical stuff. Now Christmas is over with. Yeah, Christmas. It was an interesting time because Amata went to Paris, and then I've been kind of doing the London thing and friends, family, and all that bollocks. So it's really kind of screwed us up on the channel in terms of timing. So hopefully we can get back to some normality over the next week or two. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I'll see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.